Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, May 28th, getting towards the end of the month. May 28th, and time for yet another show. We have lots on our plate, of course, this morning. Greg Dworkin joins us again for another roundup of crazy stories that we couldn't fit in yesterday's first hour, or even yesterday's second hour. But this is it. Time to go. Daily Coast Radio is live now. We are told reliably by Bill all the way up in Portland, Maine, where they are, by the way, overwhelmingly rejecting their incumbent senator in the polls. That's good news. Susan Collins trailing by double digits, I think, if I saw correctly just before jumping over here from the Twitter feed. Yeah, let's see. I can scroll back. Oh, of course. I wanted to read something, and now that I've gone back to read it, it's completely gone. All right. Well, at any rate, we'll get to that, I'm sure. Maybe Greg already has it in the roundup. Also, similar poll results, double-digit lead in evidence in Arizona. And, yeah, that's right. We also see double-digit leads and bad news for Republican incumbents in Colorado, etc. I guess we can round all of that stuff up in just a few minutes when we talk to Greg. But yes, as I was saying, Daily Coast Radio live right now, and me, David Waldman, Kagro. I'm going to find out what the hell I'm doing here just by reading the tweet. I've got details. Did you know that? What kind of details? The details about my inability to keep the throat clear. Yes, details on the White House's new Vote by Cupcake initiative. Yes, quite a lot of that going around. Hey, what do we have to lose, except our, I guess, the wait. The wait, not the wait of the cupcakes, but rather the waiting for the cupcakes. Yeah, I guess we have now more iconic video of what's her name there, Kellyanne Conway, standing outside the White House in a bizarre sort of green screen, I guess, from the video, the audio-visual room, wrapped around her as a garment, which is amazing. It was a surprising revelation yesterday, I guess, just more of Conway's willingness to just lie and honestly just shill for the White House. I mean, that's no surprise. No one's going to be shocked by my accusing her of that. Just, she's got special skills in making it more outrageous, which is really what they're looking for. Ordinarily, you say, no, I need somebody more credible for this kind of position. They just like to inflame. So yesterday, I guess her big line was that the president's opposition to mail-in voting ought to be honored because, after all, she was sure that if people could wait in line for cupcakes, then surely there's no reason why they shouldn't wait in line to vote as well. And she was pointing to here, oh, look at this. I got one computer that says Greg is calling and one computer that says that's not happening. I'm not sure how to deal with that one. Okay. The one I want is the one that says, there's nothing happening here. I don't know what you're talking about. Let's see. I wonder if maybe, is there a reason why Skype's, there we go. Oh, now it's notifying me that I've missed the call. That's good. I suppose I can initiate the call. Why don't I try that? And we'll hear weird noises in reverse instead. All right. Well, why don't I listen to this? Let's see how this goes. There we go. All right. Good morning, Greg. I don't know why your call to me didn't feel like ringing on one of the three computers that was supposed to see it.
I don't know why she swallowed a fly.
No one will ever find out. But we were busy buying cupcakes at the time anyway. Kellyanne Conway said, if you can wait in line as I often see people do, I guess maybe in olden days, waiting in line for an hour at Georgetown Cupcake, which tells you a little bit about where Kellyanne Conway lives and where her head is at and what she notices in life. Then they can wait to vote. There's no reason why they shouldn't have to. Of course, one of the big differences is pandemic. other interesting difference is 2, no, you can't wait in line for an hour for a cupcake during the pandemic. They won't let you do that. And 3, why does it take 6 hours to get a cupcake in so many neighborhoods across the country where people might just want to pick up a quick snack? And why is the Republican Party recruiting a 50,000 member army of people who will just be out there exercising their rights to, patrol the cupcake shops and deem that anyone suspicious looking shouldn't be allowed to get a cupcake? And if they get anything at all, they get some sort of provisional snack and the promise that a court might award them a cupcake next time if they just sue and take it all the way to the Supreme Court. But it's all cupcakes to Kellyanne Conway, which should surprise no one. It reflects nothing of the reality of voting, and the whole intention is to make it seem like people who are frequently given a hard time for voting or attempting to vote, and people who are the target of a coordinated national effort to suppress their ability to vote or get cupcakes, for that matter. It's meant to dismiss the whole thing, just like we used to hear about, if you need to show an ID to get allergy medication, you should need to do it to get a cupcake and or vote. And there's really no problem. And then we have the same problem we have every time, and it's well publicized. But then election day is over, and everybody says, well, we'll get them next time, right? So anyway.
I suppose, but every mention of Kellyanne Conway should really be Kellyanne Conway, whose husband, George Conway III, is part of the Lincoln Project trying to defeat President Trump with incredible ads, said something.
Yeah, that's true, too. I don't know how they survive, and maybe they don't, and I guess that's their own business, but it is a little bit weird, too. Sometimes you think, are they just playing both sides of the fence, and one of them's going to be able to get somebody to pardon the other one? I don't know what's going on, but I guess you do what you got to do.
So there's so much news and so little time. Let's do this in some semblance of order.
All right.
Let's start with the 100,000 death milestone, and Joe Biden tweeting out, these are moments in our history so grim, so heartrending. They're forever fixed in each of our hearts as shared grief. Today is one of those moments. 100,000 lives have now been lost to the virus. To those hurting, I'm so sorry for your loss. The nation grieves with you. Simple, elegant, eloquent, and sadly missing with the current president. And it's just good to remind people of that. People are reminded of that, which is why Trump is doing so badly in the polls. We'll get to that.
Yes.
But let's start with Kellyanne Conway's thrust of her remarks, which is, as usual, saying quiet parts out loud. Republicans want it easy for Republicans to vote and hard for Democrats to vote. They would like to skew the playing field, make it unfair, and they would like to disadvantage anybody who doesn't vote for them. And that is their goal. And they used to be quiet about it, but now it's just like out in the open. Look, this is what we want to do. What's wrong with that? We want to, change everything to favor us. What is your problem? Yeah. And so, Trump and Kelly McEnany said Trump had to vote by mail, for example, because he couldn't be in Florida to do it in person. Daniel Dale points out that's wrong. He was there for 2 full early days of vote. A voting site was across the street from his golf club, but he drove past it 6 times.
That's odd.
In other words, he went there 3 times, there and back. So, he's lying. At the same time, Trump is really mad at Twitter because, at least temporarily, I tried to find the exact tweets this morning, and it doesn't get labeled, but apparently 2 of his tweets were labeled and flagged with fact-checking for the very first time. Yeah. And, of course, he had a fit about it and decided to tweet that Twitter is censoring him, he said on uncensored Twitter, by tweeting about it. And then he made all sorts of weird and bizarre claims about what he was going to do about it. Here's a story in CBS News. Twitter flags Trump tweet with fact-checking label for first time. And when they show an embedded tweet, for example, there's no way, zero, that mail-in ballots will be anything less than substantially fraudulent, said Trump. Mailboxes will be robbed, ballots will be forged, and even illegally printed out and fraudulently signed. I guess Jared's in charge of doing that for Republicans. Sure. The governor of California is sending ballots to millions of people. Now, this was supposedly flagged, but when you look at the tweet in the story, it's not flagged at all.
Oh, well, that's odd.
So I don't know what's
Super
going
effective.
on with that. The Washington Post this morning, Trump expected to sign executive order that could threaten punishment against Facebook, Google, and Twitter over allegations of political bias. The president's expected to sign the order on Thursday. That'd be today.
Yeah.
President Trump's
I don't believe him, but
exactly right. The law spares tech companies from being held liable for the comments, videos, and other content posted by users on the platform. And so the law allows tech companies the freedom to police the platforms for abuse without fear of lawsuits. And critics say the exceptions have also allowed Silicon Valley's most profitable companies to skirt responsibility for the harmful content. Which is interesting, because that means that if you remove the barriers for suing, then Trump gets sued right away for doing all sorts of nasty, lying stuff on Twitter. I don't know why that helps him, but
I'm not sure.
let's look at process a little bit here.
Yes.
Because, as you taught me, process matters when it comes to things like regulations. Brian Fung tweets, the White House did not consult the FCC on a forthcoming executive order pertaining to social media companies, according to a person briefed on the matter. This suggests the draft order has not gone through the normal interagency review process.
Like everyone he does.
The person briefed added that based on the lack of interagency review, it seems the draft executive order was hastily conceived. That's why I thought Jared right away.
Oh, yeah. Stephen Miller, I guess, is recovered and could have done it.
Possibly, if he had an interest. Worth remembering that with prior White House attempts to draft an executive order targeting social media companies, the FCC and FTC, which are led by Republican chairmen, privately pushed back on being deputized to police political speech on social platforms.
They don't want the job. Okay.
They don't. This was back in August of 2019. Federal officials raised concerns about White House plan, yada, yada. Also worth remembering that as a general practice, the FCC has repeatedly gone out of its way to avoid regulating websites and internet companies. Yes. The FCC's GOP leadership made a point to avoid regulating the internet when it rolled back its own net neutrality rules. Mm-hmm. Now, looking at the text of the draft order, the main provision looked fairly similar to what we reported previously. White House proposal would have FCC and FTC police allegations. The draft seeks to curtail the power of tech platforms by reinterpreting Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, a critical law that shields websites and tech companies from lawsuits. It would indirectly, via commerce, have the FCC create regulations outlining how and when companies might expose themselves to litigation. The order also tries to tell the FTC, different than the FCC, to develop a report on complaints of political bias collected by the White House and instructs the agency to consider bringing lawsuits against companies accused of running afoul. It would tell the Department of Justice to work with state AGs to determine what state laws could be brought to bear, and it would ban federal agencies from advertising on platforms deemed to have run afoul. Much of the order could quickly get bogged down in a thicket of legal and constitutional questions. Just for example, the FTC reports to Congress, not the White House.
Ah, okay. He doesn't care.
Right.
Oh, he doesn't know that's in there.
Now, importantly, authors of Section 230, such as Ron Wyden, have repeatedly said the intent of the law was to ensure tech companies could not be sued.
Oh, no.
For the White House to leverage 230 into obtaining the opposite outcome would be to undermine the purpose of the law. That's interesting.
Yes. Everyone remember their alphabet soup? FCC, Federal Communications Commission, FTC, Federal Trade Commission. Just in case you were wondering which one is which and why each thing.
And that which reports to Congress isn't automatically obvious to me in terms of how and why you can therefore, get the president to rule on it.
You just say, like signing statements or any of the other strange executive orders he's signed. I'm saying this, and I'm the commander in chief. And
see, said his minions, he's so strong and powerful. He just overruled everything with the stroke of a pen, except he didn't.
Yeah, a lot of these things bog down on the same thing. But, so he makes a splash, he signs a thing, he waves it around, there's a photo op.
Right. Now, these stories are not being covered in terms of importance. I want to acknowledge what happened in Minneapolis last night, for example. We'll get to that. But
out of order of importance. Yeah,
out of order of importance. This is Pennsylvania Democrats accuse Pennsylvania GOP leadership of covering up lawmakers' coronavirus diagnosis.
Biowarfare.
Some Pennsylvania Democrats are accusing House Republican leadership of covering up a fellow GOP lawmaker's COVID-19 diagnosis.
Yes.
State Representative Brian Sims first made the allegations in a 12-minute-long video on his Facebook page Wednesday, claiming House Republican leadership knew that Representative Andrew Lewis, Republican, had tested positive and never informed House Democrats, including those who had been in contact with him.
Yeah.
I just spent the better part of 11 weeks sitting across the room from people who would eventually test positive and decided not to tell us. They did do some kind of quarantine. They did do some kind of contact tracing. They, I guess, being Republican leadership.
Yeah. That's
Sims claimed he had donated a kidney in January, pointed out that Democratic Representative Kevin Boyle has 2 young children, making both of them especially vulnerable. I know one of the members said, I was looking out for my family. You were exposing our families.
Yes, that's important.
So the guy really was positive, by the way.
Yeah.
On May 20th, after undergoing the test on May 18th.
Awesome.
And I can't say this often enough. If you feel like you need to be tested, you ought to be self-quarantined until you get your test results at a bare minimum. You don't get tested and then go out with the rest of the community and then make it so that, the hairdresser in Missouri has to get the case contact people to find 55, 70 people, whatever, Yeah. You isolate yourself until you know the result of the test at a bare minimum.
Yeah, that's exactly right. If you feel like you need to be tested, you suspect something's wrong, act like something's wrong. That's what the self-quarantining is about. By the way, waiting for authorities to tell you to, quote, self-quarantine, and then you're complying, that's just being quarantined. Self-quarantine is, I realize before the authorities, because I'm me and I know about myself, that I need to be careful. But party of responsibility, etc. They don't do that stuff.
Yeah. Lewis also said he chose to keep his positive case private out of respect for his family and those who I may have exposed.
Yeah. That's the opposite of what you're supposed to do with your exposure. Out of the respect for the privacy of people I may have given a deadly, potentially deadly disease to, I'm not going to tell them. Because privacy, for them, they don't want to know. They want to be private from their own health.
Right. So they're pretty upset about that.
Yeah, that's really crazy. And by the way, I'm curious whether he picked it up at one of the protests, the Open Up Pennsylvania protests that he attended.
Always hard to know.
Yes.
Norm Ornstein tweets this: I'm haunted by a brutal reality as we watch the horrific videos in Minneapolis, Central Park, and Georgia. Imagine how many murders, beatings, wrongful arrests were committed against people of color with no consequence before we had cell phone cameras.
Yes, well,
which is an awfully good point.
Yeah, I thought that was the central point of the whole film everything movement.
Yes.
I'm glad that Norm got it. Yeah, I'm a little surprised.
Eileen Rivers writes in USA Today, video of George Floyd pinned by Minneapolis cops is shocking but not surprising. Happened before. As a black journalist in America, I often feel like my coverage of these incidents amounts to screaming into the void. The history of police brutality is deeply entrenched in an acceptance that makes it almost too daunting to end. This happens all the time. In other words, something happens to a black man and the cops immediately say, I felt threatened, or he was resisting arrest.
Yeah.
Or I felt threatened while he was resisting arrest.
Right. And
therefore, that justifies my killing an unarmed man with 5 of us and 1 of him.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, I mean, I don't know. It happens all the time, and there's 1,000 such videos. Just in the age of video, there's no end to the evidence, and only some of those break through and get viral levels of attention.
You get the feeling that if, like, Philadelphia firebombed a house, in the middle of the city, that it would get like 24 hours coverage and then move on.
Yes, there was video and everything. But, we didn't have any method of distributing it besides putting it on TV, which we did do. And then everybody said, this is shocking. And now people don't remember things. They don't. Right.
So that's basically the gist of what happened yesterday.
All right.
And today, what do we have today? Today we have polls.
All right.
Lots and lots and lots and lots of polls.
We have to wait in line for hours.
From yesterday, we have some interesting ones. Rasmussen, you've heard of Rasmussen.
Yeah, they are interesting.
A C-plus poll, according to 538, and tends to be, shall we say, Trump favorable.
Yeah, okay.
For the most part.
Yeah, you've said so.
Well, they're
you're
often
right
the ones
to
that
say
have
so.
50% approval when everybody else has 43.
Yeah.
But yesterday,
Not crazy.
approve 42, disapprove 57. That's a 15-point gap. And
Even with your
it
magic
parallels Navigator research. We talk about the Navigator poll every Wednesday. We talked about it yesterday. There's more data from it. But
they don't work any other day.
they have 41 approval, 57 disapprove.
All right.
So 41.57 for Navigator, 42.57 for Rasmussen. And, that's not really all that far away from the 39.58 from the MSN tracker.
Okay.
All of those polls, and there's a 12-point gap against Trump in the civics polling as well. So all of those polls are reflecting the reality that he's doing very badly, which is why you're seeing so much of the bizarre discussion from Trump about stealing the election. He's quite worried about it because the polls really are not going in his favor. In fact, some of these polls are, the worst in a year for him.
Well, good. I hope he has...
I wonder how that could happen.
100,000 people ask the same question.
Yeah, exactly. So there's that. We have this Maine poll out from the state of Maine by a new pollster called Victory Geek. Never heard of him.
No, but good luck getting graded by 538.
Well, there's no grade, although they are listed on 538, just with an asterisk.
Well, they exist.
And I guess that means maybe it's a Democratic poll.
I don't know.
And in any case, what they have is Sarah Gideon leading Susan Collins by 9 points.
Yeah, that's good. That's not double digits. I thought I saw double digits somewhere, but maybe that was somebody else. That's close. That's as close as you can get without that second digit.
Well, here's where the double digits come in.
Oh.
Okay. In Maine 2.
2. That's one digit.
Second district in Maine, which went 51-41 for Trump. Sarah Gideon leads Susan Collins 52-40.
There's the double digits.
There's your double digits.
What happened? So in the that's interesting. Why there instead of what?
Well, but it makes it interesting to ask the question. So, what would your presidential polling be in Maine 2?
What would it be?
And is Susan Collins concerned about these numbers, or even troubled?
Deeply, I would imagine.
Because I think that deeply troubled sort of game is coming to an end here.
Oh, good. Well, we deeply want
to
defeat her, I guess. Yeah, sure.
We're deeply sorry.
I'll be sad
but
not to have Susan
Collins jokes. But I can't tell you how deeply we'd vote for this if we were in Maine ourselves.
Oh yeah.
So Bill in Portland, Maine, it's up to you. You got to do our voting for us.
Yes, and the squirrels.
Yep.
Free the squirrels.
It's you step back and say, okay, what about this poll? What about that poll? But they're all going in the same direction.
Okay, then I don't ask that.
Yep. So
I'm done.
now let's go back to Nick Gorovich because he's got some new stuff
might not work
from yesterday's poll, which I thought was interesting. Week 10, second update of Navigator survey tracking poll. A majority of voters say Trump's response to the pandemic has been a failure and that he has made mistakes making things worse than they should have been.
Yeah, he's very bad at things.
Majorities describe Trump response as failure and say his mistakes worsen the crisis, taken as a whole from the early days until now. Would you describe President Trump's response to the coronavirus as a success or a failure? More coffee. Yes. That's all, folks. Overall, success 38, failure 52. Republicans think it was success 74-16. Independents say, nah, success 30, 52, failure.
Okay.
Now, which of the following statements do you agree with more? Any president, Trump or otherwise, would have dealt with the coronavirus outbreak in the same way, 43. Trump made mistakes in his handling that made things worse than they should have been, 57.
Yes. Well,
so, yes, it's not like anybody would have just sailed through it with ease because it's a difficult situation.
Sure.
But Trump clearly made it worse.
Absolutely. And I guess maybe they I don't know, maybe people...
Even 22% of Republicans agree with that, although 78% don't.
All right, well, they're crazy. So
now, you have to broaden the picture here.
All right.
Trump's approval on health care is negative, 38-54. That's a minus 16.
Okay.
And this all fits into the healthcare. And one of the things, well, why are the Democrats always talking about healthcare? Well, this is why. Democrats hold large advantages on many issues, especially healthcare. Democrats hold a 54-32 advantage on pre-existing conditions, which you should remember the next time the president makes some insane claim like he saved coverage for pre-existing conditions.
Yes, he loves saying that and just saying the opposite of what's happening.
Well, keep reminding folks.
Yeah.
I like that he keeps doing that. Please indicate who you would trust more to handle each one. Protecting health care coverage for people with pre-existing conditions, Democrats 54, President Trump 32.
Okay.
All right.
So
now, this is interesting.
Election's over. No?
Because this has changed. The net Democratic finding here, I'm trying to read these things, net Democratic total and net Democratic independent, it looks like. Protecting health care coverage for people with pre-existing conditions. The net Democratic total is 22, and it's 25 with independents. Now, the thing that Trump does best on, which is interesting because it's changed because everything else is like he's doing pretty bad, double digits, making decisions about how and when to reopen the country. President Trump 40 and Democrats in Congress 44. And that's an improvement in that people early on trusted Trump at least as much, and now are trusting Democrats more. So that's basically a signature issue, and that's why it's so important.
Yeah. All right. Well, that will remain a signature issue for the time being, as much as Trump would like to distract from it. But
that's the
big thing.
Trump distracting is our next group of things to talk about, which we'll do right after the break.
Okay. Well, one of the things that's interesting about the way he distracts is that he does it using the same things, the same methodologies and tools that just remind you. I remember him saying something exactly like that about this other thing, which I don't trust.
And of course, there's a tweet for it, but Nick has an answer.
Excellent. Oh, well, good. We'll get to Nick's answer before he knocks off for the week after this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And, all right, ready to roll forward. Where did we leave it? We had a whole thing.
Distraction. We're talking about distraction, so I hope you weren't distracted by the break, folks.
That's what it was. Okay.
Now, Nick Orovich has this very interesting question that he asks. And we cover Nick a lot because his firm here, Navigator, is asking really interesting questions. For example, in looking at what's breaking through in the news, it's not all coronavirus. The awful killing of Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia had the highest awareness of any story we asked about, above the hydroxychloroquine story and well above Trump's manufactured Obamagate story.
That's interesting. Good.
So that's good. Now, Gorovitch says, when Trump distracts, like he's trying to do my manufacturing outrage over Obamagate, or I would add, when he's trying to manufacture outrage over Twitter censoring conservatives or vote by mail, it's best to just call him out on what he's doing rather than try to battle it out on his terrain. So he shows as an example, who do you agree with more? Those who say Donald Trump is trying to change the topic from coronavirus in order to distract Americans from how he's downplayed the health risks of coronavirus from the start and how he continues to fail to address the crisis?
Tempting.
Overall 56. Agree with that. And only 34 agree with those who say that Donald Trump has successfully handled the coronavirus outbreak and it's time to start focusing on other things like rebuilding our economy, rooting out the corruption left behind by the Obama administration. Only 34% agree with that.
Yeah, I do not. Okay. I am.
And using that same Republican framing,
yes,
this time he presents it not as is he trying to change the topic, but rather those who say that Donald Trump is lying about former President Obama to cover up for his administration's corrupt and unethical behavior, that only gets a 49 compared to the 37 for the standard Republican framing. Mm-hmm. So 49 to 37 if you accuse Trump of lying, 56 to 34 if you accuse Trump of trying to distract from screwing up the crisis.
Okay.
That's important because that's really, if you're looking at independents and low information voters and people who don't pay attention to politics, they know Trump lies. They don't need to hear that. They don't want to hear that. What else do you have? It's not new.
And yet they know it. It's funny because some of us
built
want to
in.
hear
but
it.
That you continue to distract from that which should be done is what people care about.
All right. Yes.
So if you're a Democrat running, that's what you do.
Interesting. Because, there'll be a large contingent of Democratic voters who say, just say he lies. Interesting.
That
All right.
doesn't work as well.
Well, I guess not. And, I guess if there's a way to communicate that.
Personal attacks against Trump didn't work in 2016. It's not, people weren't sure whether to believe it or not, but even if they did, that was never the point of voting for him.
Well, it is interesting. So I'd love to get more people
I know he's a crook, but
on
he's our
board
crook.
with this and say, look, wink, wink. We know that you want to hear us say that Trump's a liar, but we've got your vote, and it's not like we want to.
For you. You like words? I got better words.
Yeah, it's not that we're taking your vote for granted. It's all right. We've won the argument with you. We understand where you are. What I'm trying to do here is there are some people who should be voting with us, who for whatever stupid reason need to hear it put this way. So I'm putting it that way. If you like to talk about how he lies, I'm saying, wink, wink, he lies. I'm putting it in these. The polls told me this word works with that guy. I've got you. I need him. I'm using that word. Think of it as this word instead, if it makes you feel better. Okay.
Well, so Nick Orbich tested words. Of course, we have the word clouds.
Oh, yeah.
But the words that trouble people most about Trump's behavior right now, unprepared.
Yes. Bad.
Irresponsible.
Also bad.
Self-absorbed.
Yeah, they're three bad things.
Right? And unprepared is not a good thing right now in the middle of the pandemic. The most concerning descriptors of Trump's response to the pandemic include irresponsible, self-absorbed, unprepared. Half of Americans say that self-absorbed applies to Trump's response very well.
Not. Yeah.
Among those mixed on Trump, 68% say unprepared applies to him, while 58% say it's the most concerning.
Yeah, well, better than too prepared, as Chuck Todd says.
Right. So what concerns you, self-absorbed, unprepared, irresponsible, concerns people the most. Although if you're mixed on Trump, irresponsible doesn't do it. Neither does reckless or chaotic. But self-absorbed and unprepared are what people are willing to go out and say. In fact, self-absorbed totally applies. 65% agree that it does.
Yeah, how could you not? Jeez.
Unprepared, 62. Irresponsible, 57. Reckless, 59. Chaotic, 59. They agree that it applies,
insane. Does that
but
work?
it just doesn't concern them that much.
Okay.
Of course he's chaotic. That's his governing style. Of course he's reckless. He's willing to break things in order to get stuff done. But he's irresponsible. Well, of course he's, he is irresponsible. Oh, that's not good.
Yeah. I don't know. They haven't been polling the words that I like eminently executable.
Well, this is a family show. He can't poll the words you would like to use.
Oh, well, that's true. But I don't even use those words.
No, those are the words you'd like to use, but you don't.
Well, I use them on Twitter.
And these are other words like liar that you would like to use, but you shouldn't because that's not really what convinces people.
Right.
And the name of the game here is persuasion.
I guess so, unless we push them through a meat grinder.
Right. Which is an interesting discussion in and of itself.
Yeah.
I'm all in on persuasion. I always have been, you know that.
Right.
And trying to establish dominance by blowing somebody away just about never works.
Yeah, it's a rare.
You should do this because it totally destroys it. Well, what reality planet are you on? That's not how voters respond to things.
No, but that's good for viral videos.
And it's great for video games, too.
True.
If you're battling orcs and demons,
that used to be
if you're actually trying to convince voters, not so much.
That used to be the big clickbait thing. Watch someone totally destroy something, and
with this one, clever trick.
All right. Well, I never really believed in those. Okay. Well, that's interesting. So I guess, at least if you see Nick Gorovich doing this, everyone now will be able to wink, wink. Yeah, we know what he really means.
Yeah.
Nick will deny it, but that's all part of the game, right, Nick? Now we have our own conspiracy theory. I like this.
Right. So, again, all of that is, I think, quite important. And then as soon as I locate it, because I didn't set it aside.
What he's really polling is whether we should use a stun gun on him.
Right. Exactly. There's interesting information from Kyle Kondik, who's actually citing Alan Abramowitz at the Center for Politics. Larry Sabato's Crystal Ball, that shop.
All right.
Out of Virginia, if I'm not mistaken.
This. Yes. We wouldn't mind if he was out of Virginia, honestly, but we'll keep him for now.
Alan Abramowitz on Biden's lead in the swing states, complete with a chart, and how the current polls correlate better with the actual 2016 state results as opposed to the final 2016 polls. In other words, Biden's lead now correlates better with actually how it turned out than what the polls say was going to happen at state level, which should make you feel a little bit better about current polling. In other words, the pollsters appear to have adjusted for some of the mistakes they made in 2016 at state level, adjusting for education, for example.
Yes. Okay, well then...
so they're more accurate. So the proposal here, the posited thesis from Alan Abramowitz is, you know what? The pollsters did their job between 2016 and 2020. And if you look at what they're getting now and you compare it to, the results then, they look pretty good. For example, Arizona, Colorado, Florida, Georgia, Maine, Michigan, Minnesota, North Carolina, New Hampshire, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Wisconsin. On average, for all of those states.
I've been everywhere, man.
The final Clinton 2016 polling margin was 1.6. And the actual vote margin was 0.2.
Okay.
For all of those states. Biden's 2020 current polling margin is 6.5.
Large.
And I guess if you go back and you apply the standard that the pollsters are using, Biden polls versus Clinton actual margin matches pretty well. And matches the actual margin much better than the final polls do. So what he says in the article, after taking deep dives into this, this suggests that pollsters have adjusted their sampling and weighting procedures to correct for some of the problems that occurred in 2016 in light of the 2016 results. But the election's still 5 months away.
Okay.
So it's not 6 months away. And then it's going to be 4 months away. And people are still going to be saying it's too early.
Yes, well.
It's not too early. The polls are starting to reflect what's going on here, folks.
All right.
I know you don't like it, but it's true.
When do we start voting?
We start voting, October.
Okay. Even by mail.
That's 4 months.
Yeah, not a whole lot. We have to make it through the summer.
Right. I define swing states as those in which the margin separating Donald Trump, this is Alan Abramowitz, and Hillary Clinton in 2016 was under 6 points. Given the high degree of consistency in the outcomes of recent presidential elections from one election to the next, it seems like a reasonable standard. So that's where you get those 13 states. Trump carried 7 of the 13, winning 50.2% of the major party vote for 49.8% for Hillary Clinton. However, he won 118 electoral votes for the states to 45 for Clinton. Decisive margin in the Electoral College from the swing states reflected very narrow victories in 3 states with large blocks of electoral votes, as we all know, Florida, Pennsylvania, and Michigan.
Right.
Because Wisconsin we talk about all the time, but it doesn't have as many electoral votes as the other 3 there.
Right.
So how is President Trump doing in 2020? Not so well.
All right, cool. Let's get rid of him. Yeah.
So recent polling in 13 swing states shows a consistent advantage for the presumptive Democratic challenger Joe Biden over the current Republican incumbent Donald Trump. Biden leads Trump in all 13 states, although his margin in 5 states is less than 5 points. In several of these states, the final 2016 polling overestimated Hillary Clinton's support, but Biden is also doing considerably better in the polls than Clinton did in the final 2016 polls in these swing states. So just note that that's true, and just, for example, follow places like Maine 2nd District, Maine 2, to see how that's all playing out. Yeah. So Biden's doing fine. Does he have issues? Yes, he does. There's at least one other report showing that his support's a little soft from younger black voters. But then again, it's, relatively early in the campaign. And those people who aren't paying that much attention, how can anybody not be paying that much attention? Well, there's other things going on in their lives.
Yes.
Great Depression, pandemics, things like that. There'll be time for that. Well, I still find it fascinating that a lot of polls, when you're looking at, for example, presidential approval, have a weird kind of inversion going on. Let me give you an example of that. If you're looking at all adults in the YouGov poll for this week, all adults.
Right. All of them.
Each and every one of them.
I see you.
Then in the YouGov poll, Trump's approval rating is 44 approved, 51 disapproved.
All right.
But if you look at registered voters in the very same poll,
okay,
his approval is 1 point lower at 43, and his disapproval is 5 points higher at 56. So instead of a -7, it's a -13. You have Trump doing worse among registered voters, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Than he does with all adults. It's usually the other way around.
I got it.
If you are paying attention,
and you
are unhappy with what Trump is doing.
Yeah.
If you intend to vote, you are unhappy with what Trump is doing relative to the adult population as a whole.
I guess so. That was registered, not likely.
Well, nobody knows who a likely voter is at this point. Turnout's likely to be high. Yeah. But we don't know exactly who and where.
I imagine it's even if the trend doesn't necessarily hold in the same way for likely voters. But
traditional likely voters, that is a screen you use in September. Yeah. Once you figure out what the electorate's actually going to look at. And people are using likely voters now, like Rasmussen, usually get bizarre results.
All right.
But Rasmussen's because that's what they report. Rasmussen's likely voter has 42.57 right now. It's just weird that typically, a lot of people don't like the current incumbent, but they just, not just Trump, but any incumbent, but they tend not to register and they tend not to vote. Yeah. So the all-adult field usually looks a little bit more Democratic, which is why Democrats always say, well, higher turnout always favors us. So we can only get these people to vote, yada, yada, yada. That's not necessarily true anymore. Just like a lot of truisms aren't necessarily true anymore. That's not what the data says.
I see. Yeah. No, we should certainly be getting more people to vote, but that's not the reason is...
remember Sean Trendy's missing white voters? You get them to vote. You're not going to like the results.
Yeah. I guess. Well, that is interesting.
In 2016, and we didn't like the results.
The stricter the screening has been, either from all adults to registered voters to likely voters, I guess that goes back to who are the most reliable voters? The reason they're
the older voters
most likely is right. And then now we've found out that the older voters inverted on how they feel about the Republican
exactly right,
and that's being reflected in this. Okay,
that's why I brought this up. So it may be those younger voters and partial voters, and sometimes voters and not paying attention voters that fit into the all adult category. And interestingly, younger voters don't seem to be, especially voters of color, don't seem to be as anti-Trump as people slightly older than them. Maybe because they hate everybody. I don't know. Maybe because they think nobody's really looking after the environment. I don't know. But for whatever reason, it's not automatic that all you have to do is get everybody to vote and then this happens. And that's why negative partisanship, Rachel Bidikofer's model is just so powerful, because really it's not, it is the true likely voter, not the likely voter, but the actual voter.
Yeah.
Okay, which we don't know yet. But a high turnout driven by negative partisanship is important, and that means that our base has to turn out more than their base, and people who are indifferent but sort of don't like him also have to turn out. That's where the persuasion part comes in. That's why you need both arms in order to win. And that pool is out there. And, you have to, that's why Trump is going nuts about vote by mail, because it makes it easier for registered voters to actually vote.
Yeah, and it makes it easier in particular for registered voters who have a reason that's age-based, actually, not to want to go out and stand on line to cast those ballots, but to do it from home by mail.
And that's why Trump is currently warring not just with Democrats and truth and justice in the American way, but also Republican secretaries of state. In places like Florida, vote by mail is a Republican strategy, including votes from the military.
True. I've seen a lot of interesting things. A couple of states that, it's a routine practice, and people have them sitting around all the time. The emails and flyers and mailers that go out from the Republican Party, typically targeting their lists, their Republican lists. Don't forget to register for your absentee ballot, because why go through the hassle of going out to the polling place? Hey, but it's
right.
A
so the
big push.
last four polls in Florida, St. Pete polls has a tie. Quinnipiac has a Biden +4 lead. Fox News has a Biden +3 lead. Florida Atlantic University has a Biden +6 lead. So that averages to a 3.3 with a Biden lead. And if you're going to interfere with the usual Republican strategy of relying on mail-in voting in Florida, you're just shooting yourself in the foot.
All right. Yeah, I guess I'd rather have the outcome than everybody get to vote safe. But I suppose if it ends up shooting them in the foot,
and we want everybody to vote otherwise. In Arizona, also a older trending state, Biden's got a 4-point lead. Same situation there. Yeah. Right? Pennsylvania, another older state. Biden's got a 6-point lead on average.
Okay.
Right? There isn't any new polling out of Pennsylvania. This is mostly from April. But again, if you're Republicans and you're relying on that vote by mail vote, which tends to skew Republican traditionally,
yes,
then what are you doing? How is that helping you?
No, I can't imagine, especially with a population that already is slowly becoming convinced, hey, he's trying to kill us. At least I'll be able to get rid of him by voting by mail. Oh, he's trying to kill that and kill me via that as well. This guy has no idea what's going on. So
not only are the trends for Trump nationally with the national vote trending downward, 42.6 approve, 53.6 disapprove in the current 538 roundup with a downward trend from its max. And not only are the state polls favoring Biden, and not only do people like Alan Abramowitz look at current polling and say, you know what, they've made a lot of adjustments since 2016. There's more reason to trust them a little bit more. Not that anybody will till you see the outcome. But on top of that, you have a strategy by the Republican leader, which is to say Donald Trump, to screw Republicans, because the things that they rely on in order to turn out the vote are things that he is questioning and fighting with right now.
Well,
and you scratch your head and say, look, when you have a divided party, I know it until it pulls together. You have this, you have that. It feels, but you don't really see it. But at the end, when it all pulls together and it turns out that party loses, then you go back and say, okay, well, this is why, and this is why, and this is why, and this is what happened.
Yeah.
And could we have seen it coming? Yes, we could, if you looked.
It was pointed out to you. Yeah, that'll be interesting if he finally is bounced out of office. The reckoning among Republicans and the people who will suddenly realize, oh, yeah, that is weird. Maybe he had no strategy whatsoever and he just lashed out from a personal standpoint after all. I've been saying this for years, they'll say at that point. After hiding and deleting all their tweets about how he's a genius and this was done to rile Democrats.
Here's another example of that, of just making bad choices. And again, when you put stupid people, and I include Stephen Miller and Jared Kushner in that category.
All right.
Okay. In charge.
Yes. Instead of Charles.
And, Bill Stepien, moving Bill Stepien up from...
forgot about that guy.
Well, he's now the assistant campaign director.
I see.
Meaning,
acting.
Meaning Brad Parscale has the name and Stepien has the authority.
Okay, all right.
As of now, because Trump has been so unhappy with Parscale.
Yeah. So
And how he's doing. So all of that's in the background. And I'm looking at this piece from 538 today, which is essentially why Trump's fight with Obama might backfire.
Gee. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, basically, the simple answer is, well, because Obama's a lot more popular.
Yeah.
But I like that they get right to the point here. Okay. There's also evidence that Americans think Obama was just a better president.
Well, that's the reason he's more popular,
He's
I guess.
A really popular former president.
Yeah, sure.
He's many Americans' number one president.
That's
so
true.
Trump's latest attack, this article says, and Obama ultimately aren't that surprising. Obama's long been a target of Trump's, and with this latest conspiracy theory, it's clear the president's trying to rally at least some of his supporters, because that's all he ever does. He never convinces anybody else. But given Obama's continued widespread popularity, Trump might want to rethink his strategy, and by the way, every other strategy he's taking right now.
Yeah, he can't
None
do
of them
that.
Work.
And he doesn't have one.
Right.
And he can't.
So, oh my gosh, he's going to do this, and he's going to rally his base, and Chuck Todd will add, and it just might work.
True. We will say that.
Because he always says that. And you know what? It just might not work. Yeah. Why don't you just put it that way? Why don't you frame it the proper way?
We'll see what happens. That's another way we could frame it. That is, yeah, I mean, I don't even like that there's a hint at the idea of he'll rethink his strategy. Okay. There isn't one, and he doesn't do that.
Firstly, he didn't think his strategy in the first place. Yeah. He wouldn't have won except for Comey. And it's not like he knows what he's doing now. He was going to run on the great economy, but again, we talked about this yesterday. Yeah. Stu Rothenberg already had Biden as the lead Biden, Trump not the favorite, before the pandemic came. Then the pandemic came, and the numbers are just awful. There's more bad numbers out today. We're looking at 40 million people out of work. And somehow or other, it's not going to affect Trump. It's not going to affect what people tell pollsters because they don't want to say anything bad about him if you're his base, but that doesn't mean you show up or you crawl through glass to be able to vote for him. Only the white evangelicals are going to do that.
Right.
And yes, you're not going to change their mind, although there's some erosion there. But again, the point is they aren't by themselves enough to win with. They're just not. So, what the marginal folks think, I don't know. I generally support presidents in a crisis. I'm not sure. Those are the people that matter most. And, he might want to rethink his strategy with them.
Sure. Yeah, rethink that strategy. This baby is a genius. Every time he needs his diaper changed, he signals it to his parents, and he's a master manipulator. This kid is a prodigy. He's a genius. I've never seen him go.
I'm going to encourage him to, to specialize and work out his talent by never changing him, because then he'll get really good at signaling faster than anybody else. You might want to rethink that strategy.
Yeah, it's not a strategy with Trump. He's only saying that because his skin is irritated. All right.
Anyway, that's the story. That's the roundup for today. A little of this, a little of that.
All right.
But,
riots, a little pandemic, a little Great
There
Depression.
are other cities besides Minneapolis who have reacted to what happened there. It is a big story. It's an important story. And, again, we'll just have to follow and see what's going on there.
Yes, I understand.
So with that, that's me for the week. And you got the rest of the show for today and for tomorrow. And I'll be back Monday. And, not a holiday this time. And we'll do it again.
Okay, very good. We'll have you back a day before Nick Gorovich gets back to work, I guess. That's always good news.
Oh, we're coming on before Nick Gorovich comes back, huh?
Yeah. It's like getting up before the rooster.
Strategy.
All right. Okay. We might want to. That's true. And we might want to incorporate some diapers into it as well. I don't know why, but it sounds good.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Take care.
Thanks, Greg. Have a great weekend. We'll catch up with you then. All right. That's it for the Nick Gorovich report. I've been noticing the market increase in citations to his tweets, which just means that he's doing a great job. I love as Greg points out, the questions he's asking are interesting ones, and by tweaking the standard stuff, we're getting better, more useful, more interesting information, certainly. So I have no objection to it. I'm just noting that that's the case. I mean, I'm just telling you what the data says, right? I make no comment on the fact that thus and such a country is accumulating coronavirus cases faster than anybody else in the world. It's just happening, and I would like people to know about it. And as a matter of fact, I mean here, by the way, I guess to shift the topic back to coronavirus, which we'll get to after the break, but we got a minute or so to run through this. I mentioned to you the other day, I think, that I got an angry-ish, irritated, his skin was irritated response from a Brazilian. And there are millions of Brazilians, so that rhymes. And that's cute. And then they didn't object en masse. Most of them, I mean, they may have in Portuguese, and I didn't see it, but this one objected in English, which indicates that he's highly educated. So that was good news. And I think he had a point. He was upset about what looked like picking on Brazil here, because I kept noting that Brazil was rocketing up the charts in terms of the coronavirus outbreak. Not so much, luckily for them, in the deaths associated with coronavirus, but just the cases of diagnosed coronavirus. And well, it was true. He was asking me, why are you picking on Brazil when the United States have so much more coronavirus? You're doing a worse job. I acknowledge that. We're doing the worst job in the world, or among the worst jobs in the world, certainly. Given the resources that we have to respond with, given the resources that Brazil lacks, I don't blame anybody necessarily for it, although it would be great if their president actually cared about it or was actively trying to stop the spread of the disease. But he's a Trump authoritarian, like we're stuck with, and like they're stuck with in Russia. And what do you know? USA, Brazil, Russia stand 1, 2, 3 in the standings, as it were, of who's got the most coronavirus cases in their country. But they really have been rocketing up the charts and are accumulating their cases faster than just about anybody else in the world, although there are a few other Middle Eastern countries that are rocketing up there too. Maybe we'll talk about them. But they've caught the notice of Time magazine, I note, who ran a story under the headline of Brazil is starting to lose the fight against coronavirus. And maybe we'll check in on that after this. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. By listener request, and one of the more immediate listeners, that is right here in the household, at Kagro in the Morning World headquarters, an objection that we haven't gotten to a super important story that is important and interesting, and I did put it away for the purposes of entertaining you with it. I just couldn't, well, one, it got buried under a number of other stories, and two, I couldn't figure out a way back around to it, even though for like 5 days in a row I thought, I really would like to share this story. It just, so many other things were happening, and the stream of consciousness did not bring me there. So my segue here is to say, I said Brazil was starting to lose the fight against coronavirus, and its president, as they say in the Time headline, is looking the other way. What I meant was Oprah Winfrey is a jerk and we hate Weight Watchers. And does everybody follow that? If you don't, let me just put it this way. There's another story which is outrageous and will make you mad, and that's the purpose of the show, I guess. So right, I didn't mean Brazil, I meant Oprah Winfrey. Easy mistake to make. Didn't mean coronavirus, I meant Weight Watchers. But it's all related. It is about, I guess, grew out of the coronavirus thing. Here's this thing. All right, here's the outrage of it. Ready? You're all familiar, of course. Now if you're working at all, you're working remotely, unless you're working in a hospital, in which case you don't care because there's bigger problems. But we're all working over Zoom. We all know about the crazy things that can happen over Zoom, and it's so funny. One person brought the laptop with them to the bathroom. Another one, their husband walked around in his underwear. The cat jumped on the keyboard. The kids won't shut up. All the foibles of working over Zoom are familiar to us, except this one, which to this point we haven't had to deal with. How about mass firings on Zoom? You get notice, hey, we're having a big meeting on Zoom, everybody, and all those faces show up in the tiled display, and it turns out that the boss is there to say, hi, this is our last Zoom meeting because everybody in this Zoom meeting is fired. And you think nobody would do that. Well, somebody has done that. Who would do that? Oprah Winfrey essentially did it. I guess Oprah Winfrey didn't get on the call. That would be too exciting. That would have been a good strategy. I got fired, but Oprah did it, so I'm okay with that. Mass firing on Zoom is the latest sign of Weight Watchers unrest. As it turns out, Weight Watchers majority ownership lies with Oprah Winfrey, which I didn't know, but I guess that sounds somewhat familiar, having noted it now in hindsight. Mass firing on Zoom is the latest sign of Weight Watchers unrest, which I did not know was an issue. The company, which has broadened its focus to wellness, I guess not mental wellness, but and is now known as WW, because that somehow brings you beyond the weight thing, I guess. Like KFC, they didn't improve their caloric count by changing it, but somehow they took fried out of it, and now they're KFC. Well, we're going to take weight out of Weight Watchers, and it could be about wellness. Wellness Watchers, or WW now. Well, they let go a large number of workers during simultaneous video conferences. And let me just say that this is not a great way to lose weight, just firing employees, although you can get them... You can drop pounds quickly that way, but it's very bad for their mental well-being. Julie Cresswell reports this for the New York Times way back on May 22nd to give you a sense of the urgency with which this issue has been pressed at Kagro in the Morning World headquarters. I've been suppressing the story for nearly a week, but here it is. On the afternoon of May 14th, which just tells you that Julie's been just as bad as I have, and really, I think your grievance is with her. This happened on May 14th. She didn't even tell us until May 22nd. This is tantamount to not telling your colleagues in the Pennsylvania legislature that you have COVID-19. On the afternoon of May 14th, Joanne Patton sat down at her computer in her home in Houston and logged into a Zoom call with her employer, WW International, the company formerly known as Weight Watchers. I like that phrasing. She listened as her boss, reading from a script, which is what I'm doing now, you're all fired, said she and the other employees on the Zoom call were being fired effective when the 3-minute session ended. I mean, I understand you have to do all of everything, including HR functions over the phone now or over Zoom or whatever, but I mean, I don't know. I just feel like the firings ought to be handled in a slightly different way, but they weren't. And not only that, you're fired effective when my free use of Zoom ends in 3 minutes or whatever. I was like, what just happened? Said Ms. Patton, 59, who's likely, gonna find it hard to get another job, for one thing, who was a part-time employee for nearly 11 years. I put a call into my territory manager and said, what was that? Are you kidding me? That's how you're going to fire me after all these years? And I guess the answer is yeah. For employees of WW, the mass terminations were especially painful because in recent years the company, under its chief executive, Mindy Grossman, and its high-profile investor and board member, Oprah Winfrey, there you go, has moved from focusing on weight loss to a more full-on embrace of the broader wellness movement, which is nice if you do it. In 2018, the company changed its 5-decade-old moniker from Weight Watchers to WW and introduced the slogan, Wellness That Works. Got it? All right. And here's a picture of WW. What was she? Is she CEO? Mindy? Where did that go? Chief Executive Officer, Mindy Grossman. All right. This is supposed to be a caring wellness corporation, said Ms. Patton, who said she would have preferred to be let go in a one-on-one conversation with her boss. The way they did it, it was just heartless. Agreed. Nick Hotchkin, the chief financial officer for WW, declined to say how many employees were fired through the Zoom calls. The company has had more than 17,000 employees at the end of last year, most of them part-time workers. It wasn't practical to have all the conversations be one-on-one. Mr. Hodgkin said. He added that. What?
I'm sorry.
You want to be on the show? What's happening?
I'm just outraged.
You're outraged at what? That it happened?
That happened.
Well, I know. That's why I'm reading the story. Is that right? Why did that
That he said
prompt
was
you?
inconvenient.
Oh, yes. Okay. Well, he's a jerk. But, he's a sea officer. That's what they do. Right? That's it. That's inconvenient. Just like, there's a lot of other things, right? It's inconvenient to prevent 100,000 people from catching COVID-19 and dying. It's inconvenient to allow people to use their food stamps to eat during this time. It's inconvenient for me to get up off of the neck of this black person I'm arresting for no particular reason. Yeah. Well, all right. They're all, terrible people. We know who they are. All right. So that's it. It wasn't practical to have the conversations one-on-one. I don't know how many people they fired here, but I don't know. I think prior to the age of the pandemic and the Zoom call, they would have found a way to say we can do this one-on-one, or at least in smaller groups. And I think the fact that it was over Zoom had something to do with it. And also, maybe just some psychological aspect of it being over Zoom. Like, they came into my house and fired me, and they did it in a personal way. And that's, we would have been just as impersonal in the conference room at your office, but at least it would have been in the work setting. Maybe that adds some of the additional sting to it. But I'm not saying you're not allowed to comment on it. This is your story. So yeah, I feel the same way. I just was surprised at what's happening here. There's another voice in my head. Okay. Well, there's a lousy excuse. It wasn't practical, but, I think you could find the way to do it. In the end, you cut the payroll, it's just fine. That's practical. Just spend a little time doing it is all. You might lose $1. He added that employees had been encouraged to reach out to their managers for follow-ups after the Zoom meetings, which is somehow more practical, I guess, because then they can just say, you don't work for us, I'm not taking the meeting, and then they don't have to waste any time. In late April, WW announced plans to cut $100 million in costs because of the coronavirus pandemic. And it's funny. Not funny. It's odd that, people are going to need their WW after the pandemic. A lot of people are complaining about gaining weight, being stuck in their house. That'll be an uptick and they'll hire, but I guess they'll have to hire new people if everybody's mad about being fired this way. In late April, WW announced plans to cut $100 million in costs because of the coronavirus pandemic. The firings and likely permanent closures of some locations are part of those savings, Mr. Hodgkin said. We know businesses are going to have to take some kind of a hit. Anyway, how you deal with it is your problem, I guess. Even as we start a phased reopening of some of our locations, we know our business will continue to be impacted by this crisis, he said. That was the context in which we decided to restructure our studio business, whatever that means, and make substantial changes to our corporate structure and workforce. Next up, an illustration of, or a photo of, Oprah and Mindy Grossman in 2018 standing around on a stage and having a conversation of some sort about how wonderful WW is, I'm sure. Ms. Patton and other employees said the wellness strategy adopted by the company in recent years had not been embraced by some longtime members who, like millions of people over the years, signed up to lose weight. When the pandemic forced in-person member meetings at studios to move to Zoom calls, attendance dropped, several former employees said. It was probably because the large portion of the membership feels like Zoom calls are impersonal, for instance. But okay. It was cancellation after cancellation after cancellation, said Nicole Nordman, 53, who worked for the company for 18 years in a variety of jobs before she was fired over Zoom. Those of us working customer service were joking daily, how could there be anybody left to cancel? Well, you were left to cancel, and then they canceled you. Although, honestly, I suppose you might wonder why, if you were the person handling cancellation after cancellation after cancellation, how could you not see firing coming at some point? And maybe that's not the point. I understand that I'll be fired. It's just, don't tell me, don't start a 3-minute timer on our call and say, when this gets down to 0, you no longer work for where you've been working for 18 years. That does feel a little rough. The company said it had not seen any spike in cancellations, which is interesting. In the first quarter, which ended in March, subscribers to its higher-cost studio and app plan fell 5%, while subscribers for its less expensive app-only plan rose nearly 16%. Before the pandemic hit, about a quarter of the company's members were paying $44.95 a month for access to workshops in its 800 branded studios or 2,500 locations like community centers, places of worship, hotels, and other spaces. Hotels, really? The other subscribers pay $20.95 a month for WW's app. The company had been making its digital platforms a priority, and Mr. Hodgkins said it was accelerating that shift. Weight Watchers became a global sensation after its founding in 1963 by Jean Nidetch, I guess, Nidetch, a housewife from Queens. Millions of people turned to its program to lose weight. Then it explains the program, and I think we all know a little bit about it, but maybe not. It's got points. This is probably not really part of the story. Weight Watchers, working for Weight Watchers was about community. This other woman here, Jennifer Remedy, mother of 3 from LaGrange, Illinois, who joined in 2000, lost 70 pounds in 10 months. And then I think a lot of people then at that point say, I really believe in the company. I want to, I'll take a part-time job. She worked for the company for 19 years as a receptionist or guide in WW parlance at multiple locations, making $25 to $35 per meeting for the 2 or 3 meetings she worked on Saturdays. Members she had seen for years had become friends. That's how it becomes like about a community. It was a community of support, encouragement, and friendship. You helped people achieve their goals and ultimately helped them to be healthier and happier, and that's why I stayed there. And that's what would make the impersonal firing so rough. Yeah, there's a few more similar stories. Interesting how many of them are, I guess it's not surprising that many of them are women, but so many of them are women and in their 50s. And, I guess the part-time job thing, it might not be so difficult necessarily to replace part-time work, but I guess the loss they're feeling here is the loss of the friend that they thought they had in the company, the lifestyle that they thought they had in the company. And I hope that, maybe they'll get together and start their own similar company, although maybe they're blocked from doing so by some sort of non-compete agreements, even for their part-time receptionists. Who knows? But I guess I and that's why I think this is a more interesting story than your run-of-the-mill. People got fired even impersonally over Zoom, and instead of Oprah Winfrey, throw in another celebrity that people love, and it still wouldn't be quite as shocking because of the nature of the company, I guess. So maybe it's a one-time thing, or it only works for this company or this kind of company, but it's pretty interesting. I don't know. I wanted to get to it, and I keep getting reminded of it, and so here, we've done it. Now, the natural follow-up, millions of people in Brazil are in danger, it's true, of contracting coronavirus. Let's see. There's a couple of other things coming up here on the Twitter machine here that want to point me in a different direction. But I am committed to the Brazilian thing here. And let me see. I know I pocketed this story about Brazil, but it might just be, it happens to be right here in front of me. It would otherwise have been easier to grab it from Pocket, the homepage of Pocket, not my collection, which was highlighting the story. But this seems important. Brazil and a number of other countries that are really racing up the charts. And I'll get to the Brazil because that's in the script here if I read the Time magazine story. But I've been watching the rankings. I've been sorting the list by total cases per million in population and total deaths per million in population, just to do it by sort of on a per capita basis. The deaths story, sometimes the per capita rankings are skewed by the microstates that happen to get hit. For instance, whether it's total cases or deaths, if you sort it, San Marino comes in at the top of both lists. But that's not only because it's a microstate, but because it's a microstate surrounded by northeastern Italy. So really, I mean, it's a casualty of the Italian epidemic. It just so happens that it considers itself its own state with a population of 33,925. So let's say 34,000. Well, it would have been the 40. Is the population adjusted for the deaths? I mean, they didn't lose that many people. That's the thing. There are 42 deaths from coronavirus in San Marino. That actually puts them at the top of the charts in the entire world in deaths per 1 million population. If they had a full million people living there, they would have experienced 1,238 deaths if the ratios had held. But they don't. They have 33,000. So the 42 people put them at the top of the charts. But it's an anomaly. And not only that, it's an anomaly that they can blame the rest of Italy for. Similarly, Andorra, a casualty of the Spanish outbreak, I would imagine, being sandwiched in between. At any rate, what the total cases story is making clear, and not only that the microstates are unfairly victimized by statistics here, but that there are a couple of small Middle Eastern states that are sort of inexplicably racing up the charts too. I mentioned that in deaths per million, the list still topped by San Marino. San Marino, Belgium, Andorra, Spain, UK, Italy, France, Sweden, interestingly enough, St. Martin, the Netherlands, and then that gets us through the top 10, then Ireland and the US, by the way. So I've been kind of watching how we've been doing with that. But when it comes to total cases, the story is a little bit different. San Marino's still at the top, but instead of, what did we say, second, instead of Belgium listed second as it is with deaths, total cases is Qatar. Yes, the Middle Eastern emirate, somehow, strangely, with the second most total number of cases per million. Not as San Marino has 19,749. There were 670 people out of their 34,000 that actually caught the disease, right? But Qatar, 17,000 per million. And then Vatican City, also a victim of the Italian outbreak. Andorra, again, small state. Luxembourg. Mayotte, another micro territory. Spain, the biggest country in the top 10. And then Bahrain, another tiny Middle Eastern state. Singapore, and then another, Kuwait. It's really kind of interesting how the Middle East, how the Arabian Peninsula has climbed up, particularly the Eastern Arabian Peninsula has climbed up the charts so quickly. And so I'm keeping an eye on them, as well as a lot of growth in South America, which brings us back to Brazil. So Brazil starting to lose the fight against coronavirus, and its president is looking the other way. They've got an enormous population. They've got an enormously vulnerable indigenous population as well. That's going to be pretty tragic. And I'm wondering even whether, as we've had here, we've had a huge outbreak among our indigenous peoples. And, you know, I guess Brazil, like us, tends to look the other way on its indigenous population as well. So maybe not a coincidence here. And of course, Brazil still, in the throes of something in which we used to be in the throes of, actively but quiet-ishly attempting to wipe out large swaths of its indigenous population so that it can grab their land for whatever reason. And I guess Brazil's still active in that in ways that we have seen fade away slowly, but not entirely. On May 9th, Brazil's death toll from the coronavirus topped 10,000. Instead of marking the grim milestone with an address or a sign of respect for the victims, President Jair Bolsonaro took a spin on a jet ski. That seems insensitive, more so even than Zoom firings. Video footage widely circulated on social media shows Brazil's far-right leader grinning as he pulls up to a boat on Brasilia's Paranoá, is that right? Paranoá Lake, where supporters were having a cookout. As he grips onto their boat, Bolsonaro jokes about the neurosis of Brazilians worried about the virus. There's nothing to be done about it, he shrugs. It's madness. That's some approach. Even by the standards of other right-wing populists who have sought to downplay the COVID-19 pandemic, Bolsonaro's defiance of reality was shocking. From the favelas of densely packed cities like Rio de Janeiro to the remote indigenous communities of the Amazon rainforest, Brazil has emerged as the new global epicenter of the pandemic, with the world's highest rate of transmission and a health system now teetering on the brink of collapse. I guess another set of the stats that I've been looking at with Brazil before I continue on. Not only it rocketing up the charts, it passed 400,000, only the second country in the world to report, anyway, more than 400,000 cases of COVID-19. Now that was just yesterday. They now are already over 414,661. Their death rate has been lower, thankfully. But I also noticed, I was looking at the total number of tests that they had administered. How do you know you have 414,661 cases? Well, you would have to have administered at least 414,661 tests, I guess, in order to say that with certainty. But, of course, there's going to be, like we're experiencing here in the United States, we're getting down to where 10% or so of the people we're testing are actually positive. Still too high, still, epidemic levels, right? So what's going on in Brazil? Their total testing so far, at least according to its reports, 871,839 tests. 872,000 tests, 414,000 plus diagnoses. 50% of the people that they're testing are positive. Now, they may still be like we are, testing only the most evidently ill people, so there's some selection for that. But still, that speaks to a new level of emergency emerging in Brazil, right in the heart of South America, and doesn't look good for what's going on in South America, where perhaps they may have fewer resources at their command for controlling the outbreak, and we'll see what happens. We'll see where it goes from there. Unlike previous global hotspots, Italy, Spain, the U.S., Brazil is an emerging economy with a weaker social safety net that makes it harder for local authorities to persuade people to stay home, and an underfunded healthcare system. When a particularly severe outbreak struck the city of Manaus, I guess, Manaus, I don't know how, that was actually supposed to be a different pronunciation. I don't think it came out that way, though. It's in the Amazon, is this city of Manaus. In late April, hospitals were quickly overrun, leading to a shortage of coffins. That does happen. On May 17th, the mayor of Sao Paulo, Latin America's largest city, warned that hospitals there would collapse within 2 weeks if the infection rate continued to rise. 17th, so 14 days from then. It's coming up. Have they collapsed? I don't know. It doesn't say in this article because it's a couple of days ago, but I guess they're right on the brink by now. The country has confirmed almost 18,000 deaths as of May 19th, with a record 1,179 people dying in the preceding 24 hours. The world's second highest daily fatality rate. Who has the first? Epidemiologists say the peak is still weeks away. Oh dear. For many Brazilian politicians and health experts, much of the blame for the heavy toll lies with the man on the jet ski. Defying social distancing measures, Bolsonaro has held large rallies with supporters and waged what he calls a war, and that's enclosed in quotes, against local governors who have tried to lock down their regions. Thanks in part to his example, many Brazilians, between 45 and 60%, depending on the state, are refusing to comply with social distancing measures, according to cell phone tracking data. Adding to the chaos, Bolsonaro fired his health minister, Luis Mandetta, in mid-April when he opposed his stance on social distancing. His replacement, a doctor with no political experience, resigned on May 15th, after Bolsonaro pushed him to reopen the economy and promote unproven drugs to treat the virus. So he's been through 3 health ministers in this short time. The crisis comes as Bolsonaro's administration is crumbling around him just 16 months into his presidency. On April 24th, Sergio Moro, his star justice minister, resigned, accusing the president of attempting to interfere with the federal police and sparking a political crisis. There's all kinds of garbage going on around Bolsonaro, who tends to attract this sort of garbage. He's only making things worse. We'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. I feel like, as I scan over this, it's a very long article on Brazil, but I do feel like it's actually probably time well spent just to sort of redirect our attention down south to a pretty extraordinary situation, not just with respect to coronavirus, but the overlap, I guess, between coronavirus and having an ill-prepared or unprepared or uninterested autocratic leader who's also a malignant narcissist, and what can happen as a result. And I guess we're actually being saved by that fabled best healthcare system in the world is perhaps what stands between us and Brazil's fate. But I suppose if fewer and fewer people have access to that, or we overwhelm it, we'll learn from Brazil's experience, I suppose, in real time about how poorly that can go. So many other stories here, though, I feel like they're being shunted aside, but that's the nature of, the show, of life. You can pay attention to a few things at once. We'll get around to everything else, but this has been going on for a long time, a slowly unfolding crisis in Brazil even before coronavirus, and we didn't perhaps give it enough attention before. Besides, we've sunk so much time into this one, we might as well continue. Let's see. So there was the resignation of the justice minister over another political scandal, the departure of the most popular member of Bolsonaro's cabinet, widely seen as a moderating force. I think we've been hearing about that even up here, right? Piles further pressure on the president. He now faces a criminal investigation into Moro's claims that could lead to his impeachment. Golly, that is close. Bolsonaro's personal approval rating has fallen 9 percentage points since January, according to a May 12th poll, to below 40%. Bolsonaro's personality is extremely ill-suited to a pandemic, says Gustavo Ribeiro. I think we have that pronunciation, maybe. Political scientist and founder of politics site The Brazilian Report. He can't unite the country because his whole modus operandi is based on sowing division. Where have I heard this before? But Bolsonaro shows no sign of reversing course, and the crisis in Brazil is poised to deteriorate even further, leaving epidemiologists, humanitarians, and regional leaders aghast. The president is co-responsible for many COVID deaths, says Arthur Virgilio Neto, the mayor of Manaus, who watched his city overtaken by the virus in late April. With irresponsible, almost delinquent preaching, he encourages people to take to the streets. he has pushed many people to their deaths. Bolsonaro, by way of background, rose to power in 2018 by exploiting a period of intense anger at mainstream politicians. An unprecedented polarization between the left and the right. A landmark corruption investigation, dubbed Car Wash, had exposed a breathtaking network of graft among Brazil's political and business elites. Bolsonaro barreled into that situation as a political outsider, supposedly immune to the corrupt structures of large parties. An isolated figure in the capital, Brasilia, he joined the right-wing Social Liberty Party to run for president, only to leave it after taking office. Upon assuming the presidency, he burnished his anti-corruption credentials by appointing Moro, the popular lead car wash judge, as his justice minister, thereby, I guess, taking him out of the role of actually prosecuting or overseeing the prosecution of the actual case. Interesting. Good play. The president presented himself as a maverick, willing to speak truths on issues that divide Brazil, praising the military dictatorship that led the country for 2 decades in the 20th century, promoting the use of force by police officers, railing against so-called gender ideology, and disdaining environmental protections for the Amazon rainforest and the rights of indigenous communities, which he says hold back Brazil's agricultural sector. Our great farmers, for instance. In his willingness to say the unsayable and to take on the pillars of the establishment, Bolsonaro took his cues from the U.S. president. So much so that international media nicknamed him the Trump of the Tropics. Over his first 16 months in office, Bolsonaro determinedly fanned the flames of Brazil's culture wars, sometimes literally. Deforestation in the Amazon rainforest last year surged 85% from 2018 as the president slashed regulations and enforcement meant to prevent land grabbers from setting fire to the forest to clear it for farming. When the international community pressured Brazil's government to slow the destruction, Bolsonaro responded by telling Angela Merkel to reforest Germany. Although, it's an interesting point all by itself, but in isolation, not in context. But Bolsonaro's sense of impunity may have sowed the seeds for his eventual downfall. Well, we'd love to hear about that. In the early hours of April 24th, Bolsonaro removed the chief of the federal police, Mauricio Vallejo. Maybe I got that right. Writing in his official decision that Vallejo had asked to step down. Hours later, Moro resigned as justice minister. He accused Bolsonaro of firing Vallejo in order to replace him with a lackey, who would illegally feed him confidential information. And later said the president had also attempted to replace the regional head of the police in Rio de Janeiro, where 2 of Bolsonaro's sons are under investigation. This does feel familiar. Bolsonaro denies any wrongdoing and has referred to Moro as Judas. Moro is more cautious in criticizing the president. Maybe he's been listening to the pollsters, Nick Gorovich here. Who knows? Speaking to Time from a gray hotel room in Brasilia, the former judge chooses his words carefully. There is a difficulty in facing the pandemic in Brazil due to the president's negationist position. That's obvious, he says, adding that he felt uncomfortable being part of a government led by a president who has trivialized the virus. But my focus is on the rule of law. He says the president's alleged interventions with police were the last straw in a whole scenario that has unfolded over the last year that showed that this new government was not fulfilling its promises to fight corruption, drain the swamp, and strengthen institutions. The overlapping controversies of Bolsonaro's handling of COVID-19 and Moro's dramatic departure have begun to sap the president's support. A survey published May 12th by pollster CNT-MDA found the president's personal approval rating fell to 39.2% from 47.8% in January, as disapproval rose to 55.4% from 47%. But Bolsonaro's radical base, which includes evangelical Christians, the military, and the agricultural sector, remains strong, says Rodrigo Soares, a professor of Brazilian public policy at Columbia University, which is a dirty, disgusting liberal leaning piece of crap university, unlike Trump University, which is terrific and out of business, and I'm not allowed to sit on the boards of any nonprofit institutions or whatever as a result. But okay. The president, the one in Brazil, is doubling down to appeal to his core supporters who would be displeased if he took a technocratic approach and listened to public health experts. That's not how he got where he is. We're watching the same movie, aren't we? The same might be said of Trump, who has at times taken an approach to the coronavirus as cavalier as Bolsonaro's. Both men have sowed confusion over the seriousness of the disease. Both have promoted unproven drugs as treatments for COVID-19, despite warnings of their serious side effects. In March, Bolsonaro visited Trump in the White House, a trip that ousted Health Minister Luiz Mandetta, later described to CNN as a corona trip, because several members of Bolsonaro's team tested positive for the virus afterward. Remember that super spreader event? Yet, while Trump leads the richest country in the world, Bolsonaro leads an emerging market with one of the world's highest rates of inequality. Healthcare access is patchy for millions of people, and fewer in Brazil than in the U.S. have the conditions necessary to work from home. Miguel Nicoleles, one of the most respected scientists in Brazil, and I ought to know his name, I guess, who is coordinating a committee for northeastern states to track the virus's spread, says the situation is still worsening. Despite the very serious problems in the U.S., the exponential curve of cases and deaths in Brazil suggests we are not even close to our peak yet. In April, Wanda Ortega Witoto, a nurse technician, began monitoring the chief of her indigenous community, Messias Martins Moreira, 53, of the Kokama people, had a fever that wouldn't let up, which Ortega believed was COVID-19. There is no health center in Parque das Tribos, their remote community of 700 families on the banks of the, Tarumaya Ashu River? Maybe. I don't know. Goodness, it's getting difficult. In the Amazon, at first, Martins didn't want to go to a hospital, to a hospital in the nearby city of Manaus, saying he would rely on traditional medicine. By the time he realized there was no other way, he couldn't breathe, Ortega said, and he died on May 14th. Brazil's 800,000 indigenous people, many of whom live in remote areas in the vast Amazon rainforest, will now find themselves particularly vulnerable to the pandemic. More Brazilian names to deal with. Hoenia Wapichana. Wow. Indigenous names in, I guess, Brazilianized Portuguese becomes difficult. This is the country's only indigenous member of Congress, so you'd think I'd get the name right, has warned that the community's isolation and lack of health and sanitation infrastructure could turn the coronavirus into another genocide for indigenous people. The first occurred when the Portuguese arrived in Brazil in the 1500s, carrying diseases and staging violent takeovers of land that wiped out most of the more than 3 million indigenous people living there. And all over Brazil, there are vulnerable communities. Roughly 11 million people live in Brazil's favelas, shanty towns, often on the outskirts of major cities. Cramped homes, limited water infrastructure, and unsafe working conditions have left millions of favela residents struggling to stem the spread of the virus. With case numbers yet to peak, health systems around the country are on the edge of collapse. In Sao Paulo, 90% of ICU beds are full. In the state of Pernambuco, where ICUs are 96% full, a shortage of ventilators has forced doctors to choose not to treat some cases, like Italy, and some hospitals are treating patients in the hallways. In Rio de Janeiro state, the waiting list for a hospital bed topped 1,000 in the second week of May. Some emergency facilities opened a few weeks ago are already over 90% full. And of course, the United States would never be in any position to actually help with any of this because we don't do that anymore. The economic impact of the coronavirus is also likely to carry a heavy human toll. Even as lockdowns have been only partially implemented, the economy is projected to shrink 5% in 2020, which would be the deepest recession since records began in 1900. Incomes have already fallen sharply among the majority of the population who cannot work from home, and particularly among the roughly half of the workforce who earn a few $100s a month in the informal sector. Humanitarian groups say a hunger crisis is in the cards for the quarter of the population who live in poverty. The government announced an estimated $30 billion package to funnel emergency cash to those who cannot work. The impact of this is especially unpredictable in Brazil, where almost every economic crisis since its return to democracy in 1985 has been followed by a sharp political shift. Ribeiro, the political scientist, says it is very, very possible that any such shift in the near future would be accompanied by social unrest. People are as radicalized as I have ever seen, and now we're going into an economic crisis like I've never seen in my lifetime, he says. I don't see a rosy future ahead of us. Bolsonaro has a not-so-secret weapon that could help him ride out the storm. A former army captain, the president has forged a tight alliance with the military. Active and former military officials currently hold 9 of the 22 cabinet positions, and they appear to be closing ranks around Bolsonaro, which analysts say might shield him from impeachment. The president may yet survive, but many of his people will not. Carlos Machado, coordinator of the Observatory Against COVID-19 at the country's Epidemiological Institute, Fiocruz, sees the makings of an extremely dangerous situation for Brazil in the current moment. When public health emergencies overlap with extremely precarious political and economic crises, it can create a humanitarian crisis, he says. Brazil is heading there. So, wow. Up to speed on Brazil, I guess, in a nutshell anyway. Much more, I'm sure, nuance to be learned and gained from all that, but it's worth casting an eye down there, just so you won't say I never saw it coming when it finally explodes. All right, let's see. Many other stories waiting in the wings, trying to find where to go next with all this. Couple of tips from listeners that have come in over the last couple of days, and I'm thinking that maybe, let's see, which direction to go in all of these. We've got some interesting reporting and parsing of data, what little there is, coming out of Florida that's worth taking a look at. Let me try this. Although she's not listening to this show, we do cite her very frequently. Zeynep Tufekci, who's always got a jaundiced eye on everything, I guess. But it's an interesting approach she's taking. She's actually following up a little bit on something we discussed the other day. The 2 hairstylists in Missouri that went back to work, one of whom at least was symptomatic and knew it, but they were forced back to work just to, I guess they're claiming, make ends meet. Whatever happened with all of that? And there's a tweet thread she maintains and went back to this morning that starts back on the 25th, saying, I've seen many stories and tweets about 2 hairstylists who exposed 140 people by working for 8 days while symptomatic. 1, this shouldn't happen. But 2, where's the follow-up? Is anybody actually infected? If not, that should get as much news coverage, because it was interesting. They went through 140 people, but their clients were masked and they were masked. So I'd like to know too, right? Was it safe? Did it work out? Did anybody get it? If nobody got sick, maybe we're onto something. Maybe the masks are awfully effective, and maybe that's a great idea to tell people who are anti-mask, right? And you could frame it in a way that they would accept, right? They went back to work. We opened up one of the things that we closed down, and you said it was unnecessary. And we said it was necessary. And as it turns out, if you just put on one of these masks, and everybody else does too, then you're right. It is unnecessary. We can all go and get haircuts and make money this way if we are working as barbers and hairstylists. Don't you want to know? Now, Zeynep continues on here, still on the 25th. I've seen so many tweets and stories with the same picture of a boardwalk in Maryland, right? Ocean City. That made a lot of the rounds. I advocate for people avoiding crowds and wearing masks. On the other hand, those telephoto lens pics are misleading. Regardless, will there be a follow-up? We need real info, not scolding. And I don't know, those telephoto lens pics, maybe they're misleading, but I mean, like if you see 10 people in them, that's a bad situation, actually. I don't know. I mean, she may be saying that the conditions on the ground, there was more room around people than you would have thought from the photo, but there's still too many people there. And that they're going in and out of the same stores is a problem. But yeah, will there be follow-up? The answer, probably not. And really all you need to do is look to the Pennsylvania legislature there, defeating the entire purpose of all sorts of testing and tracking. And even when Republicans pay lip service to the idea of, yeah, we're going to do the testing and tracing thing like all you doctors say we're supposed to do, they don't tell anybody when somebody gets sick. That defeats the purpose, right? Anyway, in addition to the boardwalk in Maryland, we had the Lake of the Ozarks. And then just yesterday, they had the scrubbed launch of the SpaceX rocket. Everybody was excited about astronauts going back into space. Everybody went out to watch. And apparently there's a bridge, I guess, somewhere nearby that has a great unobstructed view, I assume, of the area where they're launching the rockets. And that was packed. Some of the people had masks on, but most did not. And just another scene of a mass crowd somewhere that should not be happening. Zeynep continues here, still on the 25th. For months, there's been, you'll see in 2 weeks, posts and tweets about this beach, that park, that party. No, let's not hold crowded parties, but yes, let's wear masks. But most of those did not seem to cause any spikes, or did they? Where's the tracing? Where's the reporting? And unfortunately, without tracing and without reporting, and reporting that you can rely on as being accurate, you can't answer that question. If 2 symptomatic hairstylists work for 8 whole days with hundreds of people, we're going to learn a whole lot from the attack rate, if there is one anyway. But to do that, we need to trace those customers and report on the findings. There is constant, you'll see, but not enough, let's learn. But then again, has it been long enough for us to see? That's another question. I don't think she would have ignored that question, but I don't know. Anyway, she updates today, right in the middle of the show, by tweeting, as far as I can tell, nobody got infected from the 2 hairstylists who worked for 8 days with 140 clients while symptomatic but wearing masks. Is this the case? That's the real question. I genuinely want to know what happened. How are we supposed to assess risk without data? And that's a great question, but that's the big problem, essentially, right? We don't know, and we may never find out. And that's what's, the most daunting problem of all here. And I guess that leads us to this other situation. I saw circulated on Twitter, and I passed it on, a word from out of Florida about even greater levels of manipulation of the data, possibly, than we were originally aware of. And it was, here I have a tweet of Twitter friend Hank Epton's got the picture of the bridge in Titusville, Florida, I guess, where all the people were pouring off after watching or hoping to watch the launch of the rocket. But let's see, somewhere earlier yesterday, I was retweeting somebody's claim that, here we are, that the numbers from out of Florida were, in fact, being underreported. And I guess the person ended up withdrawing the tweet. But the claim essentially was that Florida was masking the number of coronavirus deaths by reporting them instead as pneumonia deaths. Trying to reconstruct the tweet from memory now that it's deleted, I guess. And I'll explain why it was deleted after this. Basically, long story short on this one was that they were, that Florida averaged about 900 or so pneumonia deaths during this time of year over the past 5 years or so. But they were now reporting something like, 1,500 coronavirus deaths, but 5,000 pneumonia deaths, which would be, they were reporting 5 times the usual rate of pneumonia deaths from that terrible spring pneumonia that's always going down in Florida. Seems a little odd, to say the least. And so, of course, the theory was, well, they're just renaming coronavirus deaths as pneumonia deaths, along the lines of the people who claim things like, well, you can die with COVID-19, but not of COVID-19. If you die of pneumonia while you're diagnosed with active COVID-19 infection, COVID-19 killed you. But as it turns out, the numbers weren't as terrible as all that, but they were not good and they were being manipulated. As it turns out, Jim White, writing over at Empty Wheels Place, dug into the data himself and found that out. And I'll refer you to his article. And I don't know whether we're going to be able to get through the whole thing, but with it's not that long, with a pretty thorough review of the data that was available anyway from Florida. Even he was able to piece together numbers that were still suspicious and that led you to the same conclusion, but that were somewhat lower. Maybe that's why that tweet came down. Is COVID-19 why Florida has about, he says, 1,300 more pneumonia deaths this season than average over the previous 5, something he posted 2 days ago on the 27th. Earlier today, on the 27th, Jim says, I saw this tweet, and is it the same one? I won't be able to tell you if it's been deleted. Oh, no, there it is. All right, so maybe it hasn't been deleted. According to CDC so far this year, this tweet says, Florida has had 1,762 deaths from COVID and 5,185 from pneumonia. Average pneumonia deaths in Florida from 2013 to 2018 for the same period are 918. Probably just a coincidence, yeah? Well, that piqued Jim's interest. He says that the tweet suggests a huge excess of pneumonia deaths in Florida this year compared to previous years. The data in the tweet suggested that Florida has around 4,000 more pneumonia deaths this year than average for the previous 5 years. That sounded a little high to me, as I've spent a lot of time over the past few months poring through the data at this CDC site that he links to on weekly numbers for pneumonia and influenza deaths. Looking deeper into the tweet, it appeared to depend on a Reddit post, and it had a low number of, for Florida, reported COVID-19 deaths, so it was necessary to go back to the original sources. A couple weeks ago, I spent several hours downloading data from the CDC national database that you can access at the link above and picking out just the Florida data to paste into another spreadsheet. You see how much work he's doing? I chose a poor strategy that day, as I only looked at the total pneumonia and influenza deaths, even though the data are broken down into both categories. A few days later, I realized I needed to go back to the data and look only at the pneumonia deaths, and it seemed likely that there could have been quite a few deaths attributed to pneumonia in patients who were never tested for COVID-19. Also, flu deaths vary widely from year to year, depending on the severity of the outbreaks, effectiveness of that year's vaccine, etc. So the total number has a lot of noise year to year. Seeing the tweet today prompted me to go back and download the data again so that the 2019 and 20 data would be more up to date. As downloaded today, there are data in the spreadsheet through week number 20 for each state. For Florida, the week 20 numbers appear to be only partial totals. So for this analysis, I only went through week 19 of 2020. You see, there's all sorts of vagaries around the way the data is separate. Anyway, the point of it is the total numbers of pneumonia deaths are, in 2014 and 15, about 5,500. About 5,200 the next year, 5,500 the year after that, 5,700 the year after that, 5,300 the year after that. You're getting the idea. But right now, 6,772. Very different. At least 1,000 more than the highest total in the previous 5 years, and way above the average. As he says, one of these things is not like the others. The average total for the previous 5 years is 5,486 pneumonia deaths for these weeks. And in this particular season, 1,286 more deaths from supposedly pneumonia than the average for that period in the previous 5 seasons. The COVID-19 Florida dashboard right now is showing 2,319 deaths from the virus. I would suggest that the number is more like 3,605 when the excess pneumonia deaths are included. Note also that there may well be other deaths due to the virus in patients who were not tested but died due to other types of pathology seen by the virus that don't manifest directly as pneumonia. Last week, I asked how many COVID-19 deaths Ron DeSantis is hiding. We can now account for about 1,300 of them, and it seems likely there well may be more. So, good parsing by Jim, getting us to more realistic overage numbers, but still startling overage numbers, basically leaving us with the same conclusion. Florida, and maybe Georgia, and maybe Alabama, and maybe Missouri, where we're still trying to find out whether anybody among the 140 people exposed to the coronavirus by these 2 hairstylists actually came down with the thing. We lack for data. And Brazil explains for us pretty well what happens if you intentionally lack for data, plus overwhelm your healthcare system, which may be what's happening in the areas of the country that the virus tends to be moving to now. Easier to do there than it is in the cities.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
All right, time now for Justice Putnam to take you off in his particular direction on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Let's see what's in the big fat middle portion of the show here. Trump bragged about lowering drug costs after vowing to veto a bill that would lower drug costs. He makes so much sense. It happens every day. Something we missed. Thankfully, Justice picked it up.